We're live. Thank you very much. I'd like to call the meeting to order this morning and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Inuit, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. I'd like to introduce the members of the panel today, the secretary and the assessor. My name is Brett McIntyre, and I'll be chairing the hearing this morning. Zooming in is Cynthia Stevens. To my right is Robert Upton, and an observing panel member is Bill Moretsky, and he's sitting in the audience. Jason Robertson is our secretary today, and Matthew Baracus is the assessor. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by this board. Board of Revision is appointed annually by council and is independent of it and the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by the questions that the board may have. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 6 on our docket today. Mr. Robertson, please affirm the assessor's and applicant's testimony.
Please stand. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Mark Newman.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give to this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Assessor,
Yes,
please state your full name.
Matthew Barocus.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. As a preliminary issue, and this is to both parties, is the only issue valuation? Mark?
Yes.
Matt?
yes,
So I'll extend that to all the properties on the record and we can proceed a little quicker. The first property on the docket is 50 Ridgecrest Avenue, and Matthew, you can proceed.
Can
okay.
Mr. Chairman, just before we get going, and Mr. Barocus and I have talked about this, these properties are all exactly the same in their nature. And so what I intend to do is ask a series of comprehensive questions on the first property with the view that I won't have to repeat those on all the other properties, just for efficiency of time.
And that's fine. I don't think the board has any problem with that. We've done that before.
Yeah.
Okay, Matt,
Okay.
you're up.
Okay, one moment. Let me pull my stuff up here. Okay, thank you. File 22-564 4, roll number 0509375100, 50 Ridgecrest Avenue, roll year 2023, reference date April 1st, 2021. We have the assessed value coming in at $24,373,000. This property is an assisted living property. The location is north of Chief Peguis, east of Main Street, a little bit down Ridgecrest Avenue, between the road and the river. One moment. So we classify these types of properties as apartments. There have been municipal board decisions in the past whereby the way these properties are valued, even though they're different, they operate different than a typical apartment, insofar that they have large communal rooms, they've got 24-hour staff, they have meal service, shuttle service. Decisions in the past have rendered the conclusion that they should be valued just on their ability to operate as a normal market apartment. So that's how we're valuing them today, using market parameters based on the physical composition of the apartment aspect of the facility. I'll get into a bit more when we talk about suite composition and what rents we've used in comparison to typical market rents. Carrying forward, so it was built in 2012. Construction Class B reinforced concrete frame, zoning RMFM. Going down here, hasn't been an issue with the mailers, so they're good with that. No recent sales. So we've got the multifamily rent comparables on page 3. So you'll see that the model has selected $1,092.17 as our average rent. And then so basically what it is looking at newer apartments in the area. One thing you'll notice is that there is a larger 1-bedroom component to this property versus the 4 comparables, which are predominantly 2 bedrooms. So that's something that should be taken into consideration. The gross floor area per unit is also smaller. This is also another thing with these assisted living is the unit sizes are small. Often they don't have full kitchens. They just have kitchenettes. They won't have a dishwasher. Maybe they won't have a full stove. And they're smaller physically. So you can see on a gross floor area per unit basis, even though there are large communal areas and other aspects to the property, like a kitchen, you can see that the gross floor area, which is still much smaller than these other typical apartments. So there is a element of difficulty when it comes to trying to pin down what the rent would be on these places, because they are new, but they're different, and we can't use their actual income because it includes the business aspect. So anyway, what we have here is we've got 883 assigned to, that's the gross floor area, sorry. The average monthly rent is $1,092.17. And you can see that it falls below the comparators. That's on purpose. We have it in our system at a below average income quality to reflect the let's say, how shall I say this, different and maybe suboptimal suite layout. That's why the average monthly rent per unit is lower than its typical apartment comparators. So just to go a little bit further with that, if you go to my page 4, you see what I did is I took the CMHC October 2020 information. CMHC puts out market reports, and what they do is they'll break down what average rents are in certain areas of the city. Then they'll break it down by year built. They have age category groups. They also have another group in terms of how many units are in the building. I didn't include that because I didn't think it was as relevant as the year built, and also where it was located in the city. So you can see that it's weighted on a 1, 2, 3, 4 bedroom basis. So it's calculated out to consider what the average rent would be just using these tables. Then if you go to my page 5, basically you can see combine the averages, and then assessment year 2020, or rather that should say 2023, my mistake. For this building, if we're using just the CMHC data to calculate what the average market rent would be, it'd be $1,193. And so then the average yearly potential rent as per what just using these tables would come out to would be $2,477,46. So I did this so we can compare what the model is assigning to the property. The model is assigning based on it being at a below average income quality to reflect its physical characteristics. $2,267,345. So it's just basically showing that we're using 91.53% of the CMHC table rent, using that as the calculation in our evaluation for potential gross income. Now, below it, I included the tables, so you can cross-reference the figures if you like. I also, on the top of page 4, I included the website where I got it from. It's from a CMHC website, so you can, if you want to put that into Google, you can verify that these numbers do indeed come from the website. So essentially, we're below market, and it should be based on the characteristics of the units. So then we just have our income value summary on page 6. So we've got a 4.2 vacancy loss, 46.7 expenses. Those are all modeled. Net operating income comes out at 1,157,738, 4.75 cap rate as selected by the model. That's how we get to our value of 24,373 rounded. So on our cap rate, on page 7 is our cap rate table showing the various ranges for various sections in our department. Multifamily is the 4th, or actually 5th row from the top, 2nd from the bottom. Shows our ranges in comparison with other main players in the market. Page 8, this is a table here that shows an example of, now it's not meant to be subject property specific. So it's a table with some properties that have recently transacted in the market. We have their income and expense statements and their sale price, so we're able to, upon stabilizing over multiple years, come up with a cap rate. Now, in past years, the cap rate's always been 5 and above. This is meant to show that there is actual real market data, transactions showing cap rates that are under 5%. So that's not something that's out of the blue. Again, not subject property specific. There's a number of ages This table appears in all our briefs, so it's not a subject property specific. Page 9, municipal assessment act excerpts. You guys have seen that before. And then I've just included the mailers at the end of the brief. And then a picture of the exterior is my last page. Again, the expenses also include the business aspect to it. The communal kitchen, the staffing, whatnot, and all that goes along with that. So just modeled below average expense ratio was what appears in my brief here today, because you can't use the actuals as a comparator. That's my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, any questions?
Yes, thank you. And again, I'm going to ask questions generally as I discussed at the outset. Mr. Brokus, have you inspected any of the properties on the docket today?
I think I was inside of Hallenquist once, but that was a long time ago, but no, I have not.
Okay. So we agree ultimately that what we're doing here is to determine what a buyer would pay to the willing seller of April 1 of 2021, correct?
Yes.
And I think you've made it clear to us that these calculations are essentially model driven, correct?
That is correct, yes.
So, and that means every element of it. So the gross potential income and the rent that's assigned, that's derived by the model, correct?
That is correct.
The vacancy is by the model, the expense ratio is by the model, that leads to net operating income, and the capitalization rate is by the model.
Yeah, for 50 Ridgecrest, yes.
Nothing is site specific.
That is correct.
Okay. So the properties we're dealing with here this morning, they're all the same in concept, although they might be slightly different in the number of units, but they're all the same in concept.
That is correct.
And as you indicated to us, they're not like traditional apartment buildings in the sense that, as you stated, they don't have a dishwasher. They don't have a stove. The layouts are smaller. So they're atypical of the newer built apartments. Would you agree?
Definitely.
And would you also agree that the newer built apartments tend to have a washer and dryer within the suite?
Yes.
And the subject properties this morning do not, correct?
Not to my knowledge.
And you're aware these properties have been before panels of this board in the past, correct?
Yes, they have.
And you've looked back at the history of how the boards have dealt with these properties?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And many of the same issues that are arising here today have arisen in the past, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So let's look then at the 50 Ridgecrest brief if we can. Let's look at page 3, which is your set of comparables. And you've noted, and in fairness, Mr. Brokus, you've noted a couple of things in your evidence. So firstly, you've noted that the gross floor area is smaller and compared to all the comparables. And again, that's because these units tend to be smaller, correct?
Yes.
Would you also agree that because many of the residents are, to some extent, they have mobility issues, sometimes they need walkers, that the hallways are wider, the bathroom doors, the bathrooms themselves are larger than would be typical for a newly built apartment?
Yes.
You noted as well that you used the phrase, it's difficult to pin down rents. And here, again, as we've discussed, the model derived the rents, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And you talked about $1,092 being the average rent for the units in this property. And you said that's because it's based on a below average income quality, correct?
Yeah, based on our model, we've got different parameters. And based on the nature of the property, it was set at a below average nature to an attempt to recognize some of the things you just brought up.
And how many income quality tiers or categories are there? Is below average the lowest?
No, there's one lower.
And is it, what's that called?
That would be called poor.
Okay. And then how many above below average?
No, there's 3 above.
3 above.
So there's 5 in total. There's 1 in the middle at average, and then there's 2 above, and there's 2 below.
And these comparables that you've used, they'd all be above below average, I'm assuming.
Yeah, the rents that are assigned, these aren't their model rents, these are their actual rents, but they're typical normal apartments. So they're different than the subject property, no dispute there.
And as you've noted, the mix of 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms is quite different. Your comparable number 1 is 2 bedrooms only. Your comparable number 2 is 79 twos out of 90. So, you know, perhaps close to 90%. Your comparable number 3 is 2 bedrooms only. And your comparable number 4 is 2/3 2 bedrooms.
Yes.
Do you know if any of these comparables have 2 bathrooms?
It wouldn't surprise me. There's usually these newer buildings that have multiple layouts.
Yes.
And a lot of the times you can get a 2 bedroom with, like, in the 2 bedroom column, there's probably 1 bathroom, 2 bathroom options. So I'd be surprised if that wasn't the case.
And the below average category, how many apartment buildings in that category don't have either full or at least partial kitchens? Any idea?
Oh, I would say most of them actually would have a full kitchen.
Right.
They wouldn't be like in the physical condition. Often they would be run down.
Right.
But they would have a full kitchen of some sort in there.
Okay, let's look at your page 4 and 5 then. But just before I leave page 3, to be clear, the income calculation which appears on page 6 of your brief and the selection of the average unit rent of $1,092, that is all done by the model, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so now let's look at page 4 and page 5. So you made reference to the fact that this is data derived from CMHC. And just so it's clear to the panel, CMHC publishes a lot of different types of data about apartment buildings, correct?
Yeah, all sorts of data, vacancy data, units in the universe, and then rents, obviously.
Okay, and units in the universe is simply its a count of the number of units, both by neighborhood or zone and in the city of Winnipeg more generally.
More generally, and broken up by, West Kildone and St. Vital, different areas.
Right, and so those are sometimes called zones or neighborhoods. So let's look at your page 5. What you're showing us there, and you noted the assessment year should be 2023. I anticipate the reference date should be April 1 of 21 as well.
Yes, it should be, but the data I took was from the October 20 table, so it is the relevant data. That was just a typo on my part.
Sure, okay. And what you were attempting to illustrate through this is that the modeled potential rent, so the gross potential income you used is $2,267,000. And so what you wanted us to understand is that essentially there's a discount of 8.5% by virtue of the differences in this property that we've talked about already this morning. That's what you wanted us to understand, correct?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. You didn't use the CMHC data to derive the rents. That came from the model, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All you wanted to do by giving us this example of CMHC is again to show that there's an 8.5% difference between what CMHC might say and based on neighborhood and zone and year of construction, correct?
Yeah, basically just trying to show that we are, it's like another piece of evidence on the side, showing that we are below market.
And then you indicated there's two charts that you use, or two sources of data from CMHC. So I'm in the lower half of page 5 now. The chart in the middle of the page, that's the chart that shows rents by zone or area of the city, correct?
Yes.
And so in this case, this property is in West Ledonin, which is zone 6. And it tells us that the 1-bedroom rents in zone 6 West Ledonin are $1,030, and the 2-bedroom rents are $1,244. That's what it tells us.
Yes.
And the chart below is it's the chart based on year of construction. And so what this tells us is that for buildings that are built 2005 plus, at October of 20, the 1-bedroom rent is $1,317. The 2-bedroom rent is $1,557.
Yes.
And so that's the data that you took out of here. And you said earlier when you described this, that you didn't use, because there's another set of data which is based on size of buildings, correct?
That's correct.
And so what that does is that will provide information about rents in buildings which have more, all sorts of categories, but among them is buildings that have more than 100 units, correct?
Yes, that's another analysis that they did.
But you chose not to use that, as we can see.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. You would agree with me that in Winnipeg, in the last number of years, there has been a lot of construction of new apartments, correct?
That is correct.
And so this chart, which shows rents for 2005 plus construction, it's going to be influenced by the quantity of new construction in the city of Winnipeg over the last number of years. Do you agree?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, I'll indicate I've got some rebuttal that speaks to this issue, and I don't know if I should bring it out now or bring it out when I get to my portion of the presentation. That might be the better thing to do, and if Mr. Barakis wants to ask questions, he can.
Well, I think we'll proceed on the basis of hearing your presentation.
Right.
And then the rebuttal.
Fair enough. All right. So then we get to your capitalization rate chart on page 7. And as you've noted, the box second from the bottom is the multifamily. And it tells us that the city of Winnipeg 20th percentile is 4.8%, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the capitalization rate assigned to this property is 4.75%.
Yes.
So it's below, it's a lower capitalization rate than the 20th percentile, but there are no sales of buildings like this, are there, within the city's database?
No, there are not.
And similarly, you've also reported the broker's information, so Collier, CBRE, and Cushman & Wakefield. Do you know whether the brokers also report capitalization rates for seniors housing?
I'm actually not sure about that.
Okay, we'll get to that in my presentation. I'll tell you that they do, but clearly there's no data for capitalization rates for seniors housing in the chart, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Then when we go to page 8, there's 6 properties that sold there. One of them, 2390 McPhillips, the first one is actually one of your comparables, correct?
Let me see. 2390 bucks. Yes, it is.
Yes, it's your comparable number 2. And so the city's data says the capitalization rate was 4.8% for this property, 4.79, sorry. And 2390 McPhillips, it's a traditional apartment building in the sense that it's got a full kitchen, it's got a washer and dryer in the unit, it's got all of those things, correct?
Yes, it is.
Right. And notwithstanding that difference between that property and the subject, the capitalization rate for the subject was set at 4.75%, correct?
Yes, that's the capitalization rate that the model selected for this property.
Right. Okay. And from your review of how panels have treated this property in the past, you're aware that frequently the capitalization rates have been set at 5.5%, correct?
Yes, I am aware of that.
And you would agree with me that your list of capitalization rate comparables on page 8, none of them are the type of property that the subject is, correct?
Yeah, I agree.
And just to be clear, you mentioned earlier, and we talked about the proportion of 1-bedroom units and 2-bedroom units. That's important because the greater the number of 2-bedroom units, the higher the average rent in the building will be, correct?
Yes.
I think those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Cynthia, do you have any questions of the assessor?
Just a couple. So just to clarify, these kitchens, what do they actually have? They have a fridge, obviously, and any other appliances? Are you aware?
I believe they have a microwave. I don't think they have a dishwasher in them. Again, I haven't inspected them, but I know they have a smaller kitchenette without a stove, a smaller refrigerator, I believe in there. But it's not like a full blown kitchen like you find in a normal apartment unit.
Okay. And you're not aware of the sizes of the kitchens in terms of them being able to be renovated at some point, or? They're pretty small, I gather.
Yeah, they're small. I wouldn't think that anyone, in terms of like blowing out walls, I don't see anyone really.
Anyway, you could do that, okay.
Yeah.
And just lastly, so your comparable sales on your cap rate comparison, so they're these kinds of buildings, do they sell very often?
Newer builds?
Well,
Yeah.
no, these kinds of properties that are, assisted living.
No, and that's the difficulty is
Yeah.
I don't have any data to come up with a more of a market data analysis. That's why it gets the model capitalization rate.
So do these buildings tend to stay with the same owner once the owner has built them, and then they tend to continue to manage them? Is that how that normally works?
I would say more, I don't have any data, but I believe more so than a typical apartment.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
No, I don't think I have any right now. Thank you.
I just have one clarification, Matthew. On page 11, the mailer does say, in fact, that there's 173 in-suite fridge and microwave. So I assume that that's clarifying they all have fridge and microwave.
In-suite fridge and microwave, yes. So that's what they have.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. And Mark, you can proceed with your presentation. Just let us have a minute to get with.
Let me just mention that hopefully the secretary.
Just give us a second.
Now we get back to the, here we go. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Hopefully the secretary has both my rebuttal,
I do.
but I also sent over late in the day yesterday a chart. And this is it's not evidence. It's intended to make it easier for the panel, because we're going to be talking about 6 different properties with 6 different rents and 6 different vacancies and 6 different expense ratios, 6 different cap rates. I put all of that onto a chart just so it'd be easier for you to use and follow the argument as we go along. So perhaps we can bring both of those matters forward.
Do you want to take a 5-minute break so we can
Review it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. 1 moment.
Sure. Has he got the evidence?
He should. I sent it to him.
Matt, you've muted your microphone. Okay, thank you. We'll reconvene the hearing, and the board has decided, of course, we'll accept the rebuttal into evidence and take the chart as information. And Matt, I assume you have those documents now?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And Mark, you can proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. So I think you already know a lot about this property and this type of property from the evidence you've heard thus far. 173 units out on North Main, 15 2-bedrooms. They're frequently smaller in size, and no stoves, no dishwashers, no washer or dryer in the units. There's a lot of turnover in these properties. Regrettably, they're older, and frequently they pass on. It goes without saying that these types of properties had a difficult time during COVID for obvious reasons. So the value proposed is $24,323,000. At one time, we used to fight a lot about the methodology. As the assessor notes, the methodology that's being used here today has now been used for a good number of years, a good number of cycles. But we've got sometimes the same issue on each of those cycles. Always the capitalization rate, that's an issue, but frequently the rents or the expense ratios as well. So these are not traditional apartment buildings, as we've noted. The layouts are different, the hallways are wider, the doorways are wider to accommodate residents who are older, sometimes with walkers or other walking aids. There's handrails and emergency intercoms throughout the buildings. The assessor noted their staffing. So there's a lot of other things going on in the building, but the real issue is the fact that the assessor can only value real estate value. And so it's like any other business, you have to get away from what I'll call the business revenue and get yourself down to the real estate revenue. Same problem with hotels. How do you get that out of there? And so the methodology we use is what the assessor has presented. I don't quarrel with the methodology, but I do quarrel with some of the components. So if you go to my brief and look at page 3, that is where I begin the discussion about rents. And I say that the assessor's got to determine the economic rent for the units in the subject property. They don't contain the full spectrum of appliances. A question was asked about alterations. I've been in every one of these buildings. I've toured units in every one of these buildings. The kitchens are what I would describe as a galley kitchen. There's essentially a wall, and against that wall is a short counter, probably a little bit longer than this table. The fridge slots in there. There's a sink. There's a microwave. That's the kitchen in these units. Maybe in many ways similar to the kitchen in bachelor's units. But there is a separate, I'll call bedroom. But again, the units tend to be a bit smaller. So we think the rent is too high at $1,092 per month. As you'll hear when we come to some of the other units, we think the assessor used reasonable rents and we don't quarrel with them. And the assessor will explain how that came to be. What we did is we looked to CMHC data as well. And you can see on page 4 of the brief, that data is the same data the assessor has presented. It's the October 2020 CMHC market report. So I provided the 5 areas within which the buildings that are in front of you today are located, but I also provided the 100+ unit building metric. And I'll explain why I think that's a better metric to use than the 2005 plus construction. So what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to take the CMHC rents and remember that many of the buildings that are newly built in Winnipeg, I think about Ironclad, I think about Broad Street, some of the big developers, these are big complexes. The point I'm making is that those big buildings are in the universe of 100+ unit buildings. They're not being excluded because they're captured by virtue of their size. So what I did is I took into account the CMHC rents by area, and you see on page 5, the 1 bedroom is $1,029, the 2 bedroom is $1,244, and I made a deduction. I made a 15% deduction to take into account the limited physical components, the limited kitchen, all the things we've talked about in terms of size. That's what I did to take that, to adjust for that. And that derived a rent of $857.65 for the 1 bedrooms. It derived a rent of $1,057 for the 2 bedrooms. And when we get to the chart at the end of the evidence, you'll see that on the chart as well. So that creates gross potential income of $1,816,000, which is significantly different than the assessor's gross potential income of $2,267,000. So I note the other elements of the assessor's calculation. So a 4.2% vacancy, 46.7% expense ratio, and the 4.75% capitalization rate. I looked to the questionnaires on this property. This property has had some issues historically in terms of vacancy, as has the adjacent building at 2701 Scotia, which we'll come to. So occupancy was not higher than 88% through 2016. More recently, vacancy is 7% in 2020, 6% in 2019. And so I bumped the vacancy up slightly from the assessor's 4.2% to 5%. So that's a difference. And again, you'll see that summarized on the chart when we get there. Level of expenses. The assessor uses 46.7%. What I did is I looked at the expenses site specific. And so if you go to page 12 of my attachments.
Can you just give us a sec?
Yeah. Probably going to be around page 20 of the PDF, I would guess. It's a chart with two columns, 2019, 2020.
Okay, I've got it. Page 22. Cynthia, do you have it?
Oh, I don't have it here. Page 22, if you're a brief.
Yes, yes, I've got it. Thank you.
22 of the PDF, I believe, is what Brent is saying.
That was a PDF.
That's 22. Yeah, you're on it.
So what I did is I took the questionnaires, and the questionnaires are attached in the following pages for 2019 and 2020 at pages numbered 13 through 24 of my brief. I guess that'll be 23 through 35 or something of the PDF. What I did is I tracked the expenses, and what I tried to do was limit the expenses to what I would call property type expenses. There's no food, there's no labor cost except for maintenance. None of that staffing is here. So I tried to look at what the expenses actually would be more typical of an apartment building. And I used my effective gross income based on my gross potential income with a 5% vacancy. So when I calculate property management, it's $1,725,546 times 5%. That turns into $86,277. I include that in each column of expenses, and the expenses come to 55% in 2020, 58% in 2019. That's what I see the expenses as being. So if I come back to page 6 of the text, the assessor was at 46.7%. I have bumped the expenses up to 49% by virtue of that analysis. I then, on page 6 of my brief, talk more about COVID, deaths and illness, disruption to operations, limited visitation rights, all of those things. They can't be ignored. Then we get to page 7, because all of these things ultimately factor into the capitalization rate, I'll suggest, for these types of properties. So then we get to page 7, which is where I address capitalization rate. So I've noted, I said the assessor is at 4.8%. That's an error. The assessor is actually at 4.75%. Either way, it's too low. I report the Cushman-Wakefield information. And you can see high rise and low rise for Cushman and the range of values. But Cushman also reports seniors housing and it reports long-term care. And you can see the cap rates are much higher for those types of properties. Colliers reports 5 to 6%, both for high rise and low rise. CBRE reports at the low end 5%. To as high as 5.75, or actually 6% in what are called low-rise B buildings. But CBRE also reports independent living facilities, reporting A-class independent living at 6.25 to 6.75%, B-class is 7.5 to 8.25. The point is that there is information out there about cap rates for independent living seniors type housing, and they are significantly higher. So I'm now at the middle of page 8 of my text. Independent living facilities differ from traditional apartments. These include the following: no full kitchens, no stoves. There's no wiring for a stove either. As you'll know, you need a higher capacity wiring for a stove. This place doesn't have that type of capacity. They're not rentable at the same rate as traditional apartment buildings. Think about who will rent an apartment building without a kitchen. There might be a few people, truly, who just want absolutely nothing to do with food, but that's pretty unusual and pretty unique. The point is that the pool of renters who will accept an apartment building without a full kitchen is much reduced and limited. That creates issues in terms of the achievable rents, but also in terms of the potential vacancy. I appreciate that the assessor has categorized this as below average and gets to the rent he does. Even below average apartments have kitchens. So these are very, very different. And at the end of the day, what I do is I summarize all this and I arrive at a cap rate of 5.5%. That is consistent with what has been done on many of these hearings in the past. And what that leads to, and now I am at the very last page of my brief. And the attachments, that's the spreadsheet reflecting the calculation. And so you can see, if we're there,
Which page is this?
the very last page of the PDF.
So page 35. That's the last page of the PDF. Page 35. I'm there. Cynthia, have you got it?
I do, thank you.
Yes, down the bottom here, 35.
Yes.
You can also write that all the way down.
So what I've done is the data I just explained to you is now reflected in the spreadsheet. The rents of $857.65 for the ones, $1,057 for the twos, the gross potential income of $1,816,000, the 5% vacancy, the 49% expense ratio, the NOI of $880,028, the 5.5 cap results in a value of $60,519,000. Let me just address the rebuttal for a moment, if I can. And it's simple and it will be brief. And it's intended to apply to every one of the properties.
Okay, let us get to there. It's the 23-page PDF.
Yes.
Cynthia, they're muted.
Yeah, I've got it, thanks.
You've got it? Matt?
Yep.
And you want to go to page 7 of that PDF.
Just click on that. Click once. Yeah. And let's go to page 7.
The chart, multifamily rent comparables?
Yes. So this is the assessor's comparable chart for 50 Ridgecrest. And actually for 2701 Scotia, which we'll hear at some point, he used the same set of comparables. So what I did is I put in at page 7 of the PDF, 50 Ridgecrest. The next page also says 50 Ridgecrest as being the subject property. The assessor will correct that because there's an error there, but keep going, go to the next page. You'll see Lady Joyce Apartments.
Mm-hmm.
That's 2390 McPhillips. The point of what I'm going to show you now is to simply illustrate what is in these buildings. And I don't think there's a dispute about this. There's in-suite laundry, there's stainless steel appliances. Obviously, there's the full set of amenities. The next page is called Riverbend Terrace. And that is, this is the feature sheet for 2465 Main and 2425 Main, two of the assessor's comparables. Again, dishwasher, stove, washer and dryer. That's the point to be made. And then the next page addresses 2430 Main Street, the last of the assessor's comparables. And what this indicates is it's a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom concept. And again, this has got the full set of appliances. So that is what I wanted to show you here. And again, I've done this with the assessor's comparables. I brought the feature sheets from the buildings. I don't think this is in dispute, but just to indicate that generally they have washers and dryers. Obviously, they have stoves and dishwashers mostly. That was the point of all this. And I don't think I need to belabor it because I don't think it's really in dispute.
I think we're all in agreement with that.
So then I want to go to what will be page 21 of the PDF.
Sorry, are we talking 21 of the rebuttal or 21 of your original presentation?
Of the rebuttal.
The rebuttal, okay.
It's that small chart.
Yeah.
Matt, you're muted again.
Yep, I'm just trying to stay quiet as the presentation happens.
Okay, Mark.
So remember I asked the assessor about 2005 plus construction, number of units built. What I've done here is I've extracted data from the CMHC reports. CMHC only started to track 2005 plus construction in 2014. Before that, they didn't do it. So it's a new tier, if you will, that they've now added. And what I'm attempting to show you here is that CMHC says the total universe of apartment units in Winnipeg at 2021 is 65,368. That universe in 2014 was 53,975. So it tells us that 11,393 additional units have come into the market since 2014. Why is that important? It's important because remember I asked the assessor, when you use the CMHC 2005 plus construction data, that's going to be skewed by the new construction. New construction means higher cost of construction. Developers need to get higher rents. It's going to skew it. Many of the properties you'll hear about this morning have been around for a significant number of years. So I give you the same data on 1-bedrooms and 2-bedrooms between 2021 and 2014. So 1-bedrooms have gone up by 3,858 units, 14.4%. 2-bedrooms have gone up by 6,267 units, 28.01%. And the 2 pages that follow are the source data for each of the areas that the subject properties this morning are in, together with the data. So it's broken down by total Winnipeg. It's also broken down by number of bachelors, number of 1-bedrooms, number of 2-bedrooms. So that's just the backup for what's in the summary chart we were just looking at. So subject to questions, that would be my presentation.
Thank you very much. Matt, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do.
On which part, his presentation or the rebuttal? Let's do his presentation first.
Yeah, his presentation. So, going to page, let's start with page 9. There's, you put down, there's cap rates. Actually, it's page 10 on the PDF, showing the seniors housing and independent living cap rates as assigned by CBRE. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, when they developed these cap rates, do you know if they were taking all of the income into consideration, including all of the business aspect of the project, or was this solely based on only the multifamily component?
I don't know with certainty, but I would suspect it's looking at the totality of the income.
Okay, so that would include, say they have a small barber shop in there, a kitchen, a chapel, housekeeping, medical, etc.
Yeah, I don't think those are typically rented out in these facilities, the chapel, for
Okay.
example, but
Mhm.
I don't think it's generating revenue.
Okay, so, but they would be taking the business income into consideration. Okay, so that would be a big difference in gross potential income in regards to their stabilization, would it not?
It would be a difference compared to the stabilization that's being done here, certainly.
Okay,
But the bottom line, the net operating income would also look presumably very different.
yes, and that net operating income looking very different, would produce a very different value than what we're doing here with a lower capitalization rate, but only using the apartment only aspect. Would you agree with that?
I'm hesitating only because don't forget that there's a lot of expenses associated with the full operation, I'll call it, including a lot of labor, a lot of staffing, a lot of food, cost of goods, those kinds of things. So I'm not sure ultimately how different the bottom line might truly be.
Okay, that's fair enough. And then, okay, so it kind of touches on what I was going to ask you next, just looking at your page 24. If we can go to page 24 of the PDF, please. So that shows the actual expenses, inclusive. That's the totality of all the expenses, or has the expenses of the apartment been netted out somehow?
Just so I'm clear, page 24, is it the questionnaire for 2019?
And 2020, just 24 on the PDF. So it says page 12 at the bottom, but it's not.
Okay, I'm with you. It's the spreadsheet of expenses.
Yes.
Yes, okay, I'm with you now.
Okay.
So ask the question again.
Okay, no problem. So what I'm asking is all these the expenses shown here, that's the totality of the expenses, inclusive of all of the expenses associated with the business aspect?
No.
So these are the expenses that have been netted out?
Yes, these are my intention and objective was to isolate property related expenses. So you can see utilities, snow and waste, repair and maintenance, insurance, property taxes, property management. So my intention was to limit these expenses to property operation type expenses, not business operation expenses.
Oh, okay. So was this provided to you, or?
I extracted it from the questionnaires.
Oh, okay. So that's the questionnaire that appears on page 32?
Well, the very next page, for example, because again, you're looking at a PDF and I'm not.
Yeah.
But the very next page.
Or 25, yeah.
So it's 13 in the lower corner, I believe. That's the source of many of the expenses.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Matt, isn't this the same questionnaires that appeared in your evidence?
Yes.
So it's nothing new.
Yeah, so total expenses, it says here, 4,554,000. I'm just curious on how the netting out process was derived from this expense mailer.
So what I did is I looked at the income and expense mailer. And I went line by line at the expenses and I isolated and extracted what I believed would be property related expenses. So utilities, hydro, water, heat, cable, snow removal, waste removal, repair and maintenance, a caretaker, maintenance supplies, taxes, insurance, professional fees, office supplies, property management. I extracted all of these from the questionnaire. And I ignored everything else that in my mind would be a business related expense.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia, do you have any questions?
No, I think I'm good, thank you.
Robert?
You said in determining rents to reduce the rental by 15%.
Yes.
How did you arrive at that 15%? Is that just a?
It was subjective. It easily could have been something different. But I felt it was a reasonable approximation to take into account the differences in the type of property.
So you didn't rely on any numbers that were in your system. It was strictly a ballpark guess sort of thing.
Yes.
15%?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
And I have no questions, so I believe this concludes the first property.
Does.
And I think we'll take a brief 10-minute break.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll reconvene the hearing. The next property on the docket is 2701 Scotia Street. And Matt, you can proceed.
Okay. So let me make sure I bring up the correct brief here. So I just sent over PDF. It says 2701 Scotia Street fixed comparables. Essentially what had happened is I used the same comparables as the last property because they're right next to each other. But then when I cut and paste, I didn't change the subject property. So I resubmitted it. That's the only change. The applicant actually brought it to my attention yesterday, so he's well aware of it. Nothing else has been amended. So file number 22.
Just hold it for a second. What do we have?
Yeah, it's labeled the 20 assessor rebuttal 2023.
Yeah, it's labeled rebuttal, correct? But it's not
Yeah,
actually rebuttal. It's just a.
But it's like, yes.
Okay, got it.
Oh, okay.
So it's the revised brief with the correct address.
It's the revised brief, and on the comparable page, it has 2701 Scotia physical components listed, as opposed to it having 50 Ridgecrest. The comparables are the same. Just for ease of use, so I don't have to.
And Mark, you've got a copy of this.
I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, you can proceed.
Okay, file number 22-563. Roll number 05009424615271 Scotia Street, River Ridge 2 facility. It's located beside the property we just spoke about. Construction 2015, 180 suites, 92 outdoor parking spots, construction capacity, and masonry bearing walls. They're good with their mailers. So moving on to page 3, you see the income value summary. So 171 one bedrooms, only 9 2 bedrooms, so we're 180 total units. Large component of only 1 bedroom units. Average monthly rent, $1,025.98. You see that there's 2 lines of valuation here. there's a $996,000. It says cost property. What that is excess land. I'll get into that later on in my brief. And then we have the traditional apartment workup here. We've got a 10% vacancy rate as of 2020. Vacancy was still 27%. So last go around we had 25% because they just they're beginning their lease up. They're still having vacancy issues. So kind of like winding that down. We have it overridden at 10%. So that 10% is not modeled. That's just an explanation why that stands out like that. So we've got a 4.8 cap rate on this property, basically the same as the last property. Expenses are modeled, and we've got the 22,484,000 for the estimated rounded value. Going to page 4 of the PDF. Again, I'll try to make this brief as possible. My comments in regards to the unit breakdown compared to the comparables, the gross floor area in comparison to the comparables remains. So I'm not going to repeat myself in that regard. And then I'll just move on forward. Page 5 shows, again, I did the same thing as the last property in a supporting evidence from the CMHC tables. So you can see if you go to page 6, it's coming out to 86% of what if I just use the CMHC calculation, would have come out to as market rents. This one is below average intermodal as well. And so we're 14% lower than CMHC. The tables appear below and the website is above where the data was taken from. So if you go to page 7, what I did is I included some land sale comparables. There's some excess land on the property. Just pulling up the notes here. So when the property was put onto the roll a few years ago, a review of the zoning bylaw and dimensional standards was taken. The required size for 180 units is 144,000 square feet, which would support 139,000 as excess land. On the parcel, on the plan, there was a large portion marked for future development, which is approximately 70,000 square feet. So as it was marked for future development, and there's a large amount of excess land on the property, the assessor at the time applied a vacant land rate to it. So looking at my brief, that's where the $996,000 additional value comes from. And on my page 7 here, what you see are comparables, vacant land comparables in the north. So they're all, they're zoned. 2 of them are RMFM. The second one is RMFL. Ideally, it would be RMFM, but I am constrained to the data that's available to me when looking at the sale prices per square foot for Roshni Bay, Lyra Gate, and Jefferson. Vacant pieces of land selling within the past 3 years leading up to the reference date. 24, 16, and $13 on a square foot basis. So we're at the lower end of that valuation as assigned by the model. That's the supporting evidence for that 996,000. When you take $14.23, multiply it by 70,000, you're getting 996 rounded. Next page, page 8, shows the map of where the vacant land comparables were taken from. So it's just to show they are in the north end of the city. similar neighborhoods, in my opinion. Vintage of house surrounding wise. And page 9 is just our capitalization rate. Comparators, that's been touched on, so I won't touch on it again. Page 10 is our capitalization rate chart, and then the rest of it is just the mailer and the municipal board excerpts. The last page is a picture of River Ridge 2 during construction. The excess land component is towards the road in front of it. The main property, the improvements we're discussing are backed off quite a bit. So there's a parking lot and then there's a component of excess land. So I should have included a site plan. I did not. But hopefully this picture will give you some idea. So just reviewing roll year 2023, April 1st, 2021, the value, the model in tandem with the vacancy adjustment and the vacant land, 23,480,000. That's my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, any questions?
Yes. So the average monthly rent in this building is $1,025.98, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And this building is adjacent to 50 Ridgecrest.
Yes,
And the average monthly rent there is $1,092, correct?
yes,
Okay. Was this one ranked as below average or something below that?
below average.
Okay. You talked about the vacancy. And you talked about the fact that they had issues. You talked about the fact that 2020 was 27%, but you put it at 10%. And I think you used the phrase that we're winding down the vacancy and the 10% was an override.
Yeah.
So did you look at the questionnaire and see that 2019 was 21% and 2020 was 27%?
Yes, I did, yes.
And did you select the 10% or did the model select the 10%?
No, it was overridden by a member of our department.
So somebody else decided 10%, notwithstanding actual 21 and 27% in the 2 years preceding the reference date.
Yeah, typically when we have vacancy rates, I mean, this is not a typical apartment, but when you bump it up around 25%, it has a real strong effect on the valuation via the income approach. Sometimes in some, at least smaller buildings that I've encountered, you're almost getting closer to land value. Not in this case, but we really don't put the vacancy higher than 25, even though the actual might very well be.
But okay, I appreciate that. So, but you didn't go to 15 or 20 or 25 in the face of 27. So I understand that.
Yes.
But are you telling me the decision was made, we're not going to put it higher because if we put it higher, it's going to erode value?
No, not at all. No, not at all. It was a matter of they're not in, well, I guess typically there's a bit of a lease up period. Perhaps this one has a longer lease up period. Usually at this point, upon construction commencing in 2015, there would be no vacancy override applied. But in this instance, like you said, they're having a longer than normal time filling the units, so that shouldn't be ignored. And the determination was made at 10%.
Are you aware? So we've talked about the fact that these properties have what I'll call a limited kitchen. Are you aware that there are 72 units in this property that have absolutely no kitchen facilities at all? Zero.
Yes. I went through your brief and I saw that and the explanation why. So I'm aware of this. Yes.
Okay. Should that be a factor in looking at things like capitalization rate or achievable rents?
I would definitely say one or the other. Probably it'd be, again, it's so atypical, but it should be recognized in one or the other, definitely.
And look at your page 6. Of your brief, that's the CMHC analysis.
Yeah,
And again, in the top half of the page, you're telling us that the CMHC rent would create potential income of $2,576,000, but the model creates $2,216,000. And again, what you're wanting to show us here is a 14% discount from CMHC rates. That's what you're wanting to show us by this.
yes.
Okay, so the last property was an 8.5% discount. This one's a 14% discount. Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk briefly about your land sales. Have you investigated these 3 other sales?
Pardon, can you say that again?
Have you investigated the 3 comparable sales you're using for land?
No, I what it was is I looked up parameters in terms of zoning and land area size and time sold prior to the reference date. And then I simply selected what, in my mind, what was generated the best 3 comparables I could, looking at their composition. But in terms of like going and driving down there and doing any more digging, I didn't have time for that.
All right, fair enough. So this excess land that you're speaking about, it's not a separate legal lot, is it?
No, it's not.
And in order to sell it, a subdivision would be necessary, correct?
Yes.
There's no cost of subdivision taken into account, are there?
That is correct.
And part of getting a subdivision is paying a 10% dedication fee to the city of Winnipeg, correct?
There's a cost involved in getting property subdivided. And I know I read that in your brief as well. I know there's a cost, but I don't have the exact percentage on what it would be.
Okay. All right, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Perfect.
This building is newer than the previous property we looked at, the adjacent building. This is a newer building.
It was built after it. Yes.
By 3 years or something like that. And this building has units that do not have kitchens?
Yes, I know there are 72 units that don't have kitchens. The applicant has it in their brief in detail. Doesn't contain the full spectrum found in traditional kitchens. So it's meant for those with higher needs. And having a full kitchen perhaps would be a safety issue. So that is why they don't have them in those particular.
Well, this doesn't account for the vacancy. The ones without kitchens are not the vacant apartments necessarily.
I actually don't know what percentage of the vacancy is comprised of kitchen or kitchenless.
I see. Okay. Okay, thank you.
I just have one question concerning the excess land. Now, if I look at your picture, because you mentioned there is no site plan, is the excess land to the right of the building that's under construction?
It's in front of it it's between Ridgecrest and the building. There's a parking lot. If you look at the picture in my brief, sorry, got to bring it up here. So if you're looking at the picture on the last page, it would be not where the shuttle buses are, but on the, towards the right, that would be the access line. So you have the parking lot to the left, and then you have the access line over to the right. So between the pictures taken from Ridgecrest via Google Map, and between that and the building.
So on to the right of the building, is it pretty close to Main Street? Like, does it also? No,
Sorry, it's in front of the building, and so it's between Ridgecrest and the building. So it's, you see where it looks like there's like gravel over there.
yes.
That would be the access lines.
And
The
it's not,
parking's on the left.
and it's
That's
not,
all.
it's not a parking lot now?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, that was my only question. Mark, you can proceed.
So, and again, I'll be briefer than on the last one. We've addressed the fact that there are 72 units here that have absolutely no kitchen facilities. The assessor noted appropriately that the intention was that these would be for residents with higher needs, and therefore there was a safety concern. They are actually having, Mr. Upton, to address your comment question, they're having issues primarily in terms of renting those units. It's, I think in hindsight, it was a bad business decision on their part that hasn't worked out. There's also an issue about the number of units. And the assessor says 180. I'm telling you there's 178. The questionnaire reports 178. If you look at the questionnaire and add up those numbers there, you're going to find that it comes to 178. What happened is two units, units 304 and 306, were taken out of service and converted to a dining room. And so that's why the number of units is down to 178. A number of issues here, the rental rate. So if you go to my brief, again, if you go to page 5 of my brief, which I expect might be PDF page 6. You'll see there again the chart of rental rates, same as you saw on the last one. And if you go to the next page, you'll see what I've done at the top of page 6, which might be PDF page 7. The one bedrooms that have no kitchen facilities at all, I've taken a 20% discount from the CMHC rent. The ones that have a limited kitchen consistent with the last property, I've taken a 15% discount, and same thing with 2 bedrooms. So I'll circle back to show you the calculation, but that's what I'm doing to get to my rents. Vacancy is an issue. 10% is too low. They're having issues here, as we've discussed. 21% in 2019, 27% in 2020. I have selected a conservative 15% vacancy, dependent on the appropriate adjustment to the capitalization rate, as we will discuss in due course. Expenses, I've done the same thing. And I won't bounce you around too much, so I'll take you to the chart in a moment. I'll just tell the story first. But I did exactly the same thing. I went to the questionnaires, I extracted the expenses. The expense ratios you'll see in a moment are quite high, but that's because they've got significant vacancy. That's what, of course, drives a higher percentage. COVID I've spoken about. Again, you've got the cap rates from the brokers and from the city's information. 4.8 has been selected here. I have no idea why 4.8 as opposed to 4.75 for a building across the street. In either event, it's too low, considering what's going on in the building in terms of the limited kitchens in all the units, except the 72, where there's absolutely no kitchens whatsoever. There's a historic vacancy issue here that continues. And so ultimately I say value of $14,265,000, but I'll show you that in a moment. Let me just talk about the land value. This land As the assessor noted, it's to the front of the building along Ridgecrest. So it's got street frontage, but the problem is it's a single lot. You can't sell it without doing a subdivision. To do a subdivision, you have to pay a 10% dedication fee to the city of Winnipeg. You need a surveyor. You need to get it registered through land titles. All of that is going to cost money. There's also perhaps an argument about proximity to the school and whether that might be seen as a negative factor in terms of traffic and all the students. I suggest ultimately a reduction by way of adjustment of 20% to the assessor's value to take into account the fact that you can't sell this land without a subdivision being done. And then let me now take you to the attachments. So I'm thinking that PDF page 24 perhaps is that expense chart again.
One with 2019, 2020. Yes.
Is it 24?
Yes.
Okay. So same thing I did on the last one, same process. I extract property related expenses only. I calculate 5% of effective gross income as the property management fee. And as you can see, the ratios come out quite high. But they do, of course, because of the vacancy. When you've got lesser effective gross income, but the expenses are relatively fixed, the expense ratio is going to be higher. If you look to the questionnaire, show the 27% vacancy, and they show the 21% vacancy in 2019. And then if you go to the very last page in the PDF, there's the calculation of value of $14,265,000, driven by the rents as I've explained them, a conservative 15% vacancy, a 49% expense ratio, 5.5 cap. So that drives $14,265,000 for the building, and then the excess land. You'd have to add the excess land to that. The assessors got it at 966. I say 966 is too high. Take that down for the cost of subdivision and add whatever value you select to the $14,265,000, and that's the combined value. Those are my submissions.
Thank you. Matt, any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Cynthia?
I just want to clarify. So your evaluation that you put on your last page there, that does not include the land, and you're saying that the land should be, your contention is the land should be 10% less than what the city has it currently. Is that correct?
20% actually, but what?
Oh, 20, sorry. Okay.
Yes.
20.
I thought you said 20.
But ultimately, whatever amount you select, you'll add that to the building value.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, you said 20. I was looking at the city's vacancy right there. So 20% less than what the city has, and that needs to be added to your value that's up on the bottom of the last page, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
And I have no questions. So that concludes this property, and we'll move on to the third one, 901 Shaftesbury Road. And Matthew, you can proceed.
Okay, one moment. So let me get it up here. Sorry. Shaftesbury, City of Winnipeg. Okay. File number 22-560, 901 Shaftesbury Boulevard, roll number 1-000-642-1100. We've got two income streams on this property. Essentially the second income stream, there's a separate 4-bedroom building that can be rented as well. According to our records, that's the $107,000 unit. 4-bedroom unit, so it's coming, we have that at $107,000. The bulk of the valuation is from the income stream above, $20,177,000 for a total value of $20,285,000. They've got it says built between 19, says actual year built in 1972, 2008. Construction class C, masonry, bearing wall, outdoor parking, 90. Go to page 2, their mailer. They've been good at handing their mailers in. So on page 3, you see the breakdown, 189 units, 19 bachelor, 123, 1-bedroom, 46 2-bedroom, and 1 4-bedroom, which is the separate structure. So the average monthly rent, $930.27. Market value per suite, $107,107. That's rounded, sorry. And then for the apartment, more typical apartment stream, it's got 3.2% vacancy rate, 2,031,531 effective gross income. They both have the same expense ratio. They both have the 4.85 cap, so highly similar is the last property. And that's how the estimated market value was calculated. The average monthly rent at $930.27. So it's lower than the last property that we just talked about. This one in our records, I believe this one has a poor income quality on it. So that's why the rent is noticeably different. It was reviewed by another member of our staff, and they determined that a poor income quality was more representative. It's not something I personally agree with, but that's the notice they got. Also, I'm not asking for an increase here at the Board of Revision. Rent comparables appear on page 4. You can see that they all have a high total number of units. Our subject property is the only one that has bachelor units. It's got a higher composition of 1-bedroom units compared to the comparables. And you can see its gross floor area is smaller. So it's the same kind of thing as the last 2 properties, same issues. So I'm not gonna really elaborate further. You can see the comparables are much higher, but these are all typical apartments, newly built, Sterling Line. It's really hard to find comparables for this type of property, but this is just to show that we're much lower than what a typical new apartment would rent for. I did the same thing on page 5 for this property as the other properties. So I used the Cinnabon zone instead. So scrolling to page 6 of the PDF shows that we're quite a bit lower compared to the CMHC rent, or it's only 74.5%. Again, I think it's, in my opinion, would be a bit too low. I put it at below average to bring it more up to 10-15% deduction off model rent. But again, I'm not asking for an increase here today. Tables, as discussed, capitalization rate evidence follows, and then the mailer. And I believe at the end, there's a picture of the facility, at least from the road. And that's my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, any questions?
A couple. So, and again, not to belabor it, your page 4, your comps, these are all 2020 or 2015 and later, 18, 19, 18 built buildings. And generally, they're going to have washer, dryer in the units, full kitchens, correct?
Yes,
And again, all much larger from a gross floor area basis compared to the subject.
definitely, definitely.
And then your page 6, the CMHC chart. I think you've got an error here. So in that top half, that combined average, you're telling us that the average yearly potential rent is $2,098,000. That's actually the model rent that you've used as the gross potential income, I believe.
Oh, yes, you are correct. So that is an error.
So, because I think that the average yearly potential income should be the $239,711 times 12, which would be $2,876,538. Then the $2,098,689 would be the model potential rent, and the percentage of market rent would be 72.95%, not 74.57%. But again, the point is, you didn't derive rents from the CMHC data, the model did it. This was just to show the discount between the model rents and the CMHC data.
Yes.
Okay. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Cynthia, any questions?
Just one. I know you indicated that you weren't necessarily in agreement with the poor quality that was assigned to the property. Any idea as to why that may be? Would it be because of the 1972 effective age at the lower end, or?
Well, I just think a 72%, as Mark Rayleigh corrected, the percentage of market rent seems like a lot. I mean, in terms of a deduction, in briefs, he said himself 15%. At below average, it comes in more around 15%. So I believe that's more appropriate. But again, I'm not requesting an increase here at the Board of Revision today.
No, but the poor quality would, like, if a property ends up with a poor quality assigned to it, would age be a factor in that? I guess is the question I'm asking.
No, it's more in regards to its condition and its ability to generate income, more so than anything. But just because of properties, old properties in good condition, and then they're showing they're getting good rents for it, and an average income quality in our system generates rents similar to what they're actually receiving. Again, I'm talking about a normal apartment here to kind of make things simple.
Yes.
We wouldn't put it poor below average. So we're just trying to line it up with what it can expect to get on the open market. The difficulty with these ones is the way we're valuing them is not the way they actually collect income.
Yeah, no,
So,
I understand that part. I'm just interested that this one came in as poor, and if you're saying the age is not necessarily a factor, then it's just interesting. That's all.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was just, again, it's a subjective determination.
Yeah.
Because we don't have hard data in this regard. I personally would have put it below average, and this is not the only property where there is this differential on it. But we should be consistent, definitely, and that's something that we're going to have to review.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. Thanks.
And Robert?
No questions. Thank you.
Just one question. Was this property developed in 2 stages? Because you're showing a year built, an effective year built of 1972 to 2008.
Yeah, so I have, let me see here. So I have the original built in 72, and then I've got as per our records that I'm looking at right now, And then I have record activation here. Which one is this? 217 upper. I'll have to check the notes, but there's got to be a reason why there is that effective age placed on it. Their construction.
So is that the house?
No, the house is in 1972 as per our records. Exterior alterations.
So then the personal care facility would be 2008?
I'm just checking our records here. Yeah, it looks like it's 2008 from the outside, but I don't have that readily available to me. I apologize, but I believe so. Yeah.
I think Mr. Newman can answer the question.
Yeah.
That's what it is. That the house is older. This was an old site where a house used to be at one point. This is Shaftesbury just before you get to the tracks. And the house is still there. And that's what it is. The house was built in the early 70s. The personal independent living came much later.
Okay, thank you.
It's two effective ages for two different buildings. Simple answer.
Okay, that was my only question. And Mark, you can proceed.
Okay, so fewer issues on this one. So the rents, we are accepting of the rents. So we're not quarreling with that. The vacancy was 4% in 2019, 7% in 2020. Assessor allowed 3.2%. So we bumped that slightly to 4%. Expense ratio 51.83% used by the assessor. We're accepting of that, but I will tell you that the expense ratio actually comes out to 55+% in 2019, 53+% in 2020. And again, the same expense chart that you've seen of the prior properties, but we're accepting of the assessor's expense ratio. The real issue here is the capitalization rate. And again, you know, you've heard me at some length on the nature of this property, and it's not a traditional apartment building. The you know, this one is set, the cap rate is set at 4.85%. So it's a little bit higher than the prior two, which were 4.75, 4.85. We're going with the 5.5 because of the nature of the buildings and the risk that's associated with buildings of this type. So at the end of the day, if you were to jump ahead to my very last page of my brief, you'll see the spreadsheet. I use the assessor's $930.26 rent, a 4% vacancy, use the assessor's 51.83% expense ratio, generates net operating income of $970,490, apply 5.5% cap rate, $17,645,000, and to that needs to be added the $107,000 for the house. And that would total $17,752,000.
Sorry, what did you add for the house? How much?
$107,000.
That concludes your presentation.
That's it.
Thank you very much. Matt, any questions?
No questions.
Cynthia
No questions, thank you.
and Robert.
No questions. Thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you. The next property is 10 Hollandquist, and Matthew, you can make your presentation.
Okay, thank you. File 22-465, roll number 074386300600, 10 Hollandquist Drive. It's another one of these assisted livings that we're familiar with today. Assessed value $16,864,000. Actual year built 2005, 126 suites. Looking onto page 2, they've been great with handing in all their requested information. Property is located across Sturgeon, right by Grace Hospital in St. James area. Page 3 shows the income summary. Again, a higher percentage of 1-bedroom units, only 2-bedroom for the 126 total. Average monthly rent, $1,035 on the property. This is at below average income quality. With a 3.2 vacancy rate, 47.12 expense ratio as assigned by the model, and a 4.75% cap rate generates our estimated market value. So page 4, these are our comparables. Again, these are typical apartments in that general end of the city. So again, as with other properties, there's a higher percentage of 1-bedroom units aside from comparable 140 Ferry Road, which is actually all 1-bedroom units, coming in at 1347, built in 97. Smallest on a gross floor area per unit, and below the range of comparables on an average monthly rent per unit basis. Page 5, I did the same thing again with the CMHC tables. So it's a below average, so it's coming out, about 12%, 13% of what the market rent would be. So it's showing that we are recognizing some of the difficulties in regards to the layout of the suites with kitchenettes, no dishwashers, small unit sizes, etc. And then again, the rest of my brief is basically the same as I had for the other ones. It has the mailers, and then there's a picture at the end. That's my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, any questions?
Again, everything model driven in terms of the calculation on page 3.
Yes.
And again, the CMHC data is not actually used to calculate the model potential rent, correct?
That's correct.
Page 8, your cap rate comparables. Again, none of them are properties of this type, correct?
That's correct.
Do you know anything about those cap rate comparables? How many of them were buildings that were which had not been previously renovated and therefore could undergo a renovation and an upgrading?
I'm not sure. I know the Grosvenor says it has an effective age on it, so as does Pembina. That would indicate that there's some work that's been done. Sometimes work gets done and we don't know about it, or we don't have it on record. So I don't have that information in front of me right now, but it would take me too long in the context of this hearing to go get it.
I understand. But are you aware of the concept that sometimes investors buy these older buildings because there's an opportunity to rehabilitate them, to upgrade them, and then take themselves out of rent control and improve the rents? And that's why they're prepared to pay what appears to be a higher price?
It could be. That's one thought, or sometimes they just buy it and then they don't do anything with it. This is just a reflection in regards to the years prior, stabilized up to what is the year before the sale date, and then reflected with the sale price to generate a capitalization rate. But yes, sometimes they I don't include properties where they're purchased and then they're totally renovated, because then it was clearly not based on their past net operating income, their considerations. So those types of properties I just exclude from analysis. It's hard to tell sometimes, but when it's apparent, it gets excluded, and those would not appear on this list.
Are you the person who actually prepared this list?
I did, yes.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Cynthia?
No questions, thank you.
Robert?
This unit, this building has smaller suites and floor area than the other buildings, the first two buildings you looked at. Only 833 square feet per unit.
I mean, that's on a, I mean, again, that's keeping in mind, that's on a gross floor area per basis. So that would include lobbies, dining rooms, common areas. I don't have the suite size per se, but you can see, even though it has those large common areas, still on a per suite basis, looking on a gross floor area basis, it's still coming in smaller than what a typical apartment would show up as. And that's one of the reasons why we're below what the comparables are in terms of rent.
Yeah, your first two units, you're looking at 880 square feet. And this is 833. Yet the rent here is 1,035 per suite.
Yeah, I mean, there's different parts of the city command different rents. And so looking at the comparables, we're below the whole range. Looking at comparable 4, they have a gross floor area of 1,420, even though they're all 1 bedrooms, and we're a good $300 below them. So again, it's assigned by the model, and the comparables in the CMHC analysis show that we are a good amount below market.
Okay, thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you. Mark?
Can I just ask one question based on his last comment?
Sure.
You said the CMHC data shows that you're a good bit below market rent.
Yes.
But the CMHC data is not for buildings of this type. Agreed?
Right. It's what I was trying to say. Let me maybe clarify. It's below what a typical apartment would be, given some of the suite composition limitations, but also taking into account that it was built in 2005, so it's not dated or falling apart or anything like that. It's just composition wise, not as attractive as units that have full kitchens and dishwashers. So that's why it would be below market.
And you say it was built in 2005, and again, it's a small point. You're aware that owners can access online the calculation of their assessment. The online information available indicates that the effective year built is 2003. And that's page 1 of my attachments, which is, I guess, PDF page probably 10. And again, it's a small point. I don't want to belabor it, but there is that difference there. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, and your presentation.
Yes. So, Mr. Upton, you were asking about the unit sizes, and as the assessor has fairly pointed out, even on a gross floor area basis, these buildings are smaller than typical apartment buildings. But of course, the gross floor area for the subject properties includes all the common areas. The 1 bedroom units in this building average 525 square feet.
And in the spectrum of one-bedroom apartment units, that's not very big. That's on the smallish size. So I just raised that with you. So here we have more of the issues we've been talking about. So if you go to page 3 of my brief, probably PDF page 4. This is the rent chart again. Now we're talking about St. James and bachelors 1s and 2s. 1s in 2020, 1009, 2s, 1204. And consistent with what I've done on the prior properties where rent was an issue, you see this on page 4. I made a 15% deduction from the CMHC rate to account for a variety of the conditions, the atypical conditions of the building. The 3.2% vacancy, 47.12% expenses, and a 4.75% capitalization rate. It's interesting that this is the oldest building, whether it's 03 or 05, it's the oldest building of the bunch. To the extent age means anything in the context of the cap rate, it's also got the lowest cap rate. So vacancy 3.2%, 2019 is 4%, 2020 is 5%. We've selected 4%, so a slight change there. Expense ratio 47.12% used by the assessor. Again, we've done the same thing in terms of tracking the expenses, and the expenses are coming out in 2019 at 56% plus, in 2020, 57% plus. We fixed the expenses at 49%. I've talked about COVID before. So then we come back to the cap rates. You've heard me on all of that before. Same broker data on page 6. None of the assessors' comparable cap rate sales are properties of this type. And I'll sum up much of this at the end in final submissions. But if you jump to page, very last page of my brief, you see the spreadsheet, the use of the $857.65 for the 1 bedrooms, the $1,023.40 for the 2 bedrooms, 4% vacancy, 49% expense ratio, NOI of $642,687, 5.5 cap, $11,685,000. Those are my submissions.
Thank you. Matt, any questions?
No questions.
Cynthia?
No questions, thank you.
Robert?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. So let's see, we proceed to property number 5 on the docket, 707 Center Street. And Matt, you can proceed.
Okay. File number 22-567, 707 Setter. File number 07438634,600. Assessed at $16,599,000. Built in 2007. It's just north of the previous property, across Sturgeon from Grace Hospital. Page 2, they've been good with their mailers, handing in their stuff. Page 3 shows the income value summary. Most notably, you'll notice that the average rent per unit is a lot lower than the last property. This was reviewed by a member of our staff, and it was pushed down to poor income quality. I personally would not have, but I'm not asking for an increase here today at the board of revision. That's why the average monthly rent per unit is much lower. We should be consistent, and going forward, we will be. So looking at the workup here, there's a 50% expense ratio also flat. That was an override that the member of our staff who reviewed this property put on. I think it's a little bit high, should be more around 45, 46. But again, I'm not asking for a change. They got their mailer, they got their assessment. I'm not trying to bump it up here on hearing. 4.75% cap generates the estimated market value $16,599,000. Brand comparables are found on Page 4. So again, more one-bedroom units, even smaller gross floor area per unit. We're good amount below all the comparables for the reasons previously discussed in the preceding properties. Page 5 shows our calculations from CMHC. They're my calculations, and on page 6 just show that with this poor income quality, the rent is 29% lower than what CMHC market would dictate for a normal, typical apartment. So in my mind, that's excessive, but not asking for an increase here today. The tables follow, and then we have the capitalization rate tables with our comparables, and with the mailer, and then a picture of the outside looks highly similar to the last property. Again, going forward, these will be set in a more consistent manner, income quality wise. That's my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, any questions?
Yes. Go to page 6, which is the CMHC combined average, PDF page, maybe page 6. So at the top box is called combined averages, just so the panel is clear on this. The $1,039.16 number is derived by use of the rents in CMHC Zone 5, which is St. James.
Yes.
And what's called the year average of $1,353 is derived from the 2005 plus construction data for the different types of units. So it's the average of the rents assignable to the 1s and 2s in the case of this building.
Yes.
And so at the end of the day, using the year of construction 2005 plus, the average is $1,353, which is $314 higher than the average rent based on zone of St. James, correct?
Yes, the year built is much higher than the zone itself.
Right. And so what that does, because that's a simple average, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So effectively what's happening is that $314 difference for the year of construction average is adding $157 per unit per month to the average.
I would agree with you if you're saying so.
And on an annual basis, it's adding $288,000 of gross potential income.
Yeah, I would say that the year is a very strong factor because that CMHC Zone 5 takes into consideration really old buildings as well. So, having a newer building should be considered.
But newer buildings are already taken into account in the Zone 5 rents, aren't they?
Yes, but they're also the rents are also dragged down by the really old buildings. I don't have a count of in terms of the whole Zone 5 universe, what percentage of it is newer and older buildings, but I know there's a lot of older 3-story walk-ups in St. James. And so that's why looking at the year itself specifically, I think should definitely be taken into account.
But my point, I guess, simply is if you use the average rents by neighborhood or zone, it is already taken into account to some extent. If you use the 100+ unit building metric, it's already taken into account to some extent. Using the 2005+ year of construction metric, based on the rebuttal data I showed you about the number of additional units over the last 7 years, I'll suggest skews it much higher. Do you agree?
I mean, yeah, like the newer builds are gonna have higher rents. As a 2005, it's a newer build. I think it should be included in consideration. Maybe but I mean, again, like zone 5, there's a lot of older apartments in this area. So that rent is essentially drags down what the higher year build properties would get. You can see there's a huge difference. So I tried to recognize both by averaging it, and we're far below what the CMHC is putting out. I just want to make a quick correction, if possible. When it says model potential rent, 1,564,920. That was an error. That's actually the effective gross income. The model potential is actually, when you look up 1,628,991, so it's coming out to 74% of what I've calculated based on the zone and year to be what a typical apartment would be. So that's just a quick correction that needs to be made. Not a big difference, but still a difference that I've noticed.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia?
No questions for me. Thank you.
Robert?
No, not for me either. Thank you.
And I have no questions. So Mark, you can proceed with your presentation.
So in this case, looking at my brief, we are accepting of the rents used by the assessor. On the vacancy, actual vacancy in 20 was 5%, in 19 was 6%, assessors allowed 3.2%. We bumped it slightly to 4%. Level of expenses, assessors using 50%. When we go back in and do the kind of review I discussed with you, we're ending up 55% in 2019, 52.82% in 2020. We've left the expense ratio at 50%. You've heard me on the cap rate already. And again, I'll sum that up at the end. And so if you go to the last page of my brief, you'll have the spreadsheet reflecting value. So I've used the assessor's rents. 4% vacancy, a slight increase. The assessor's 50% expense ratio, increase the capitalization rate to 5.5%. And that results in a value of $14,216,000. Those are my submissions.
Thank you. Matt, any questions?
No questions.
Cynthia?
No questions.
Robert?
No, not for me. Thank you.
And I have no questions. So that takes us to the last property on the docket, 1015 St. Anne's Road. And Matthew, you can make the presentation.
Okay, thank you. All right, 1015 St. Anne's Road, file number 22-566-08021135-800. Another one of these assisted living properties. Assessed for 2023 roll year at $19,740,000. Built in 2009, 168 suites. Page 2 shows they've been good with their mailers. Page 3 is the workup. So we've got, again, 141 bedrooms, so a higher component of those. Average monthly rent per unit, $957.50, 49.29% expense ratio. With a 4.8% cap, comes out to $19,740,000. Our rent comparables here on page 4 show what it would be so their rents are much lower than what typical apartments are renting for. Comparable number 3 is a 50+ residence as well. Just noting that, but it is a typical apartment. It's not an assisted living or anything like that. So we're well below average monthly rents of those properties. Again, smaller gross floor area per unit. I'm not going to belabor it. That's the same type of thing as we've seen in the past. In the prior properties, rather. Page 5 shows CMHC calculations. Again, I use zone 10 and the year. So we're sitting at about 78% of the CMHC rent. Again, that's based on the income quality of this property being at poor. Then we have our tables, cap rate charts, and comparables, which have been discussed in questions, which have the mailer, and then we have a picture of the outside of the property. So based on the previous properties, I'm just going to leave my presentation there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, any questions?
No questions.
Cynthia?
No questions.
Robert?
No questions.
And I have no questions. Mark, you can proceed with your presentation.
So this is a case where we are accepting of the assessor rents. On vacancy, the assessor is at 3.2%. We're accepting of that. Level of expenses, assessor at 49.29. The actual expenses, when again, the same analysis, come out to 46.99 and 46.94%. We've stabilized at 47%, so we brought it below the assessor's expenses of 49.29 because of what's actually happening on the property. You got the same cap rate presentation, which again, I'll sum up in final submissions. And so if you go to the very last page of my submission, you'll see that I am using the assessor's rent of $957.50. I'm using the assessor's vacancy of 3.2. I'm reducing the expense ratio to 47% from over 49%, $990,331 of net operating income, capitalizing at 5.5%, a value of $18,006,000. That's my submission.
Thank you. Matt, any questions?
No questions.
Cynthia?
No questions. Thank you.
Robert?
No, I have none. Thank you.
And I have no questions. So that leads us to the summation part. Matt, do you have a summation to make?
No, I think I've said it all already. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark?
So I will make a brief summation, and I provided the chart to you.
Yes,
just to help you follow the moving parts through and visualize it. So let me start by observing that the majority of these buildings are actually pre-2010. So of the 6 buildings, 4 of them predate 2010. One of them, 10 Hallenquist, I say is 2003 based on the online data from the assessment department. The assessor said 2005, but 03, 06, 07, 09, those are the ages I have. And then the 2 out in West Kildonan came along in 2012 and 2015. I remind you that for 2701 Scotia, we have a discrepancy in the unit count, 178 against the 180. So have that in mind. Otherwise, the unit counts are agreed. So the rents, for 3 of them, the assessor rents were accepted, Setter, Shaftesbury, and St. Anne's. For the other 3, they were not accepted. What I did is I hand wrote onto this chart in red the differences between what the assessor had done and what we had done. And so the rents are somewhat less. Then on the vacancy, So the first number that you see is the assessor's allowance, 10% for Scotia, 4.2% for Ridgecrest, 3.2, 3.2, 3.2, 3.2 for the rest. The number in brackets, which appears immediately below that, 27% for Scotia, for example, 7% for Ridgecrest. Those are the actual vacancies in 2020. And as you know, I've told you what they were in 19 and 20 through the course of this presentation. And then the number in red is the number that we've adjusted the vacancy to. So 15% on Scotia, which is far lower than what actually has gone on in 19 and 20. 5%, 4%, 4%, 4%, and then 3.2%. So the 3 at 4% represent a slight bump to the assessor's 3.2%. The 1 at 5% is a slight bump to the assessor's 4.2%. In all cases, they are below the actual being incurred. On the expense ratios, again, 3 of them have been accepted. Setter, Shaftesbury, and St. Anne's. On 3 others, adjustments have been made. And actually, the chart has an error. It says 49.29% for St. Anne's. There should in red be 47% because we adjusted that one downwards. So I mentioned that. But then for Scotia, Ridgecrest, and Hallenquist, we have adjusted them all to 49%. Again, the actual exceeded, but we've been conservative in doing that. And then the cap rate, clearly we are apart. And so I just want to make a series of comments and observations about these properties. We know they're different. That's the starting point for our whole conversation today. We know they don't have kitchens, some not at all. Others have limited kitchens, galley type kitchens, I would call them. No stoves, no washer dryers in the units the way many of the comparables do. They also are much smaller. You see that in the gross floor areas. But remember that the gross floor areas for the comparables generally will not have the common area development, I'll call it, that the subject property does. My point simply is that those gross floor area numbers for the comparables are much closer to the actual square footage of the units than is the case for the subject properties. The subject properties have, in relative terms, smaller units. So not only are they different because of the kitchen equipment issue and the washer dryer issue, they're very different in terms of their size. They're different in terms of their configuration because of the need to accommodate those who might have mobility issues. So larger doorways, more room in the bathroom, for example. These things make them atypical compared to apartment buildings. And therefore, for all these reasons, the capitalization rates that the assessor has utilized, which he's readily acknowledged, none of them are for buildings of this type. They're not appropriate. Historically, as the assessor has also recognized, this board has accepted with regularity a 5.5 cap for these buildings. I think that's the appropriate cap rate, not simply for the historic reasons, but because of the nature of these buildings, the different risk profile that comes with it. In the real world, if somebody actually built an apartment building that had either no kitchen or a limited kitchen, how much would they rent for? Would any of you rent one of those units? What would the vacancy look like? So those things need to be taken into account. And our way of taking it into account is to essentially adjust the variables that you see in the chart. And the numbers appear in each of our briefs. The last page typically is the calculation spreadsheet. Lastly, on Scotia, don't forget the land value needs to be adjusted and then added to the building value. And similarly on Shaftesbury, $107,000 for the house needs to be added to the main building value.
And with that, I will say thank you.
Thank you very much. We have heard all of the items scheduled and this hearing is now adjourned.
How do